Great. So I think probably neither of these gentlemen requires an introduction, but I am going to give one anyway. So appreciate you both being with us today. I'm going to start with Representative Gomberg. He represents House District 10, as you know, that Central Coast District that goes from Tillamook to Yachats and inland to Sheridan. David and Susan live in Otis, as he shared with us. Besides being in the legislature, Representative Gomberg describes himself as a professional kite flyer. I don't know how many of you know that about him. His company designed and manufactured kites, operated 3 retail stores, and performed around the world with large show kites. He has flown for Walt Disney, the Super Bowl, the London Millennium Celebration, and in 40 different countries. And in 2005, he was inducted into the Kite Hall of Fame. Very interesting. David is a graduate of Oregon State, where he earned a bachelor's degree in political science and served as student body president, and earned a master's in political science, economics, and history. He then earned his MBA at Willamette University. Among his awards and accomplishments, he lists 35 years of marriage to Susan Gomberg. Speaks well of him. Senator Anderson. You know, he was elected to the Senate in 2020 from District 5. He is a former mayor of Lincoln City and serves on the North Lincoln Health District Board, as well as the Siletz Tribal Charitable Contribution Board. Senator Anderson was raised in the beautiful area of Wallowa and has lived in several areas of the Northwest. He worked for 35 years in the financial industry. He and his wife, Sue, and I'm catching a kind of a pattern here, Sue and Susan, have been married for 50 years and have 2 children and 5 grandchildren. They purchased a home on the Oregon coast to retire, but state and local government have kept him from the rocking chair. So he is far from retired at this point. Locally, Senator Anderson has been active in the North Lincoln County Community Emergency Response Team, CERT, Benai Birth Camp, and Family Promise of Lincoln County as a volunteer. He is an avid golfer and a strong advocate for the Central Coast, as is Representative Gomberg. So it's my pleasure to introduce them today. They're going to be providing us an update on the recently concluded session. I've told them both that we have a particular interest in the child care issue, and we'll be looking forward to hearing more about that. And I would like to go ahead and start with Representative Gomberg. I thought each person could take 15 to 20 minutes, and then we'll open it up to questions once both of our speakers have had a chance to share their remarks. So Representative Gomberg.
Well, goodness, thank you again. So great a pleasure to be with all of you this afternoon. And I look at these faces here and know that it's not just the League of Women Voters that you are engaged in and make contributions through, but through a variety of different kinds of organizations, efforts, elected positions, and volunteer roles in our community. So thank you for all that each of you does every single day to make our communities better and stronger, and more interesting and more resilient. So this is a knowledgeable group. So I'm not going to take a lot of time describing the difference between a short session and a long session for you. What I will tell you is that the short session is a bit of a misnomer. We do just as much work in a short session. We just do it in 5 weeks instead of in 5 months. It was a bit of a roller coaster ride this time. I describe it as a roller coaster ride where we spent the first half going slowly up and the second half coming down very quickly with a lot of people screaming and waving their arms. In raw numbers, in a long session, we introduced, in the neighborhood of 4,000 bills and passed about 500 or 600 of them, including a 2-year budget. And don't be confused, a 2-year budget could take 50 or 75 bills because there's a different bill for each state agency. In the short session, we were limited in the House to 2 bills and in the Senate to just 1 bill. Excuse me. So rather than 4,000 proposals, we looked at a total of 275 proposals, and we ended up passing about 126. We passed 126 of those, although we're waiting to see if the governor signs all of them. A lot of very interesting policy issues came forward. We've talked in the past about should short sessions be limited on budget tweaks and pressing emergency issues, or should they be used to address broader policy topics? The answer to that is twofold. The first answer is we're limited in the number of bills we can introduce, but you can introduce a bill about anything you want, big or small, policy, budget, or whatever else. People can write bills about anything they want to. The second answer is there's only 5 weeks to get it passed. And if you don't have something that has broad consensus and momentum, it's not going to get to the finish line in 5 weeks. I'll give you an example of that. Something you've read a lot about was a proposal to implement a sales tax on luxury goods here in Oregon and use that money to support lower income families. That bill was introduced, big policy topic, never got a hearing. It was DOA. One member co-sponsored it. Nobody else added their name to the bill. It never got a hearing. By the end of the first week of the session, you might as well have forgotten it, except for the fact that it continues to show up in news stories and in press releases. Another example was the proposal to broaden self-service gasoline across the entire state, another high-profile issue. And I use the word broaden because we already do have self-service gasoline in many parts of Oregon. We implemented legislation that said in our smaller counties, I think if their population is under 40,000, that they can have self-service gas after hours because of the concern that with limited population, there may be fewer places to get gas, and you may need gas at night and not have any place to be able to get it. So we allowed places to pump their own. That actually happens to occur in Tillamook County, not in Lincoln County, but in a lot of our eastern counties. I'll also mention that that if you drive up Highway 18, as I do every day on my way to the Capitol, you pass the Grand Ronde Tribal Casino. They have a gas station there, and it's got self-service gas. So don't think that we don't have self-service gas in Oregon. That being said, the proposal to expand that and allow it everywhere did not get to the finish line. A lot of conversation about it. And in case you have those conversations with people about self-service gas, what I'll tell you is the proposal said that stations had to offer full service, but could allocate some of their pumps for self-service. And if they did that they had to charge the same price, whether you were getting full service or self-service. In any event, the bill didn't pass. The highest profile bill of the session was clearly, in my mind, dealing with overtime payments in the agriculture industry. And this was an issue that had merits on both sides, more than both sides of the issue. Because on one hand, you've got agriculture workers who work very hard, and they work long hours. And as a result of the lifestyle that they're engaged in, their lifespan is less than it is for people who work in most other industries. And yet, under federal law, they're exempted from overtime. So they're working longer hours, but not getting overtime payments like you would in all other industries. And other seasonal industries for that matter. I ran a kite store for 35 years. We certainly had our high season and our slow season, but that didn't mean that if we needed to hire people for longer hours in the summertime, that we were exempt from paying them overtime. So on one hand, you've got people who work hard and deserve to get paid for their work. On the other hand, you've got the farmers who are being asked to pay these overtime payments. Many of these farmers are not in a position where they can set prices on their products. If their costs go up, it means their margins go down. And we heard from many farmers who said, if we have to incur these higher costs, it's going to put us out of business because we can't charge more for our products. And there was a concern that family farmers would be impacted and that family farms may go out of business and be absorbed by larger corporate farms. And finally, I say all sides of the issue because not lost on me during this extended conversation is the fact that there are areas where food costs can be adjusted if food prices could be adjusted if food costs go up. And that means that you and I would pay more for our groceries. Certainly seniors on fixed income and working families that are having trouble paying their costs already would be impacted by rising food costs. So it was a complex issue. At the end of the day, the measure did pass pretty much on a party line vote. And the decision was made to provide overtime payments in the agricultural sector, but to roll it out over an extended period of time, and also to provide some tax credits to small farmers that were facing higher costs. That was a high-profile issue, and probably, as I said, the greatest focus of contention within the session. I want to come back to that contention issue when I close up, but I wanted to share with you that while the headlines and the focus of the session were on these policy issues, I think the real legacy of this short legislative session is not going to be about policy, it's going to be about money. And it's just fascinating that here in Oregon, in spite of the pandemic and in spite of a number of other challenges we were facing, the state brought in more money than we ever had before. People were making more money, people were paying more taxes, the state was generating more revenue. We're going to have a record kicker this tax year and again next tax year. And we can talk about the kicker in more depth when we get to questions and answers. The point that I wanted to make is the state had more money to spend, and we brought in money from the federal government. And a result of that, we had the opportunity to make investments on housing and workforce training and in healthcare and in behavioral health and in infrastructure. My goodness, our district continues to face ongoing challenges with infrastructure. What am I talking about when I say infrastructure? I'm talking about water systems, sewer systems, parks, ports, public buildings, many of which were built, as you know, 100 years ago and are wearing out. And small towns can't afford to replace big projects. I use the example of Waldport, where they needed $1.4 million to replace a wastewater system. And that was going to come to $800 for every man, woman, and child in Waldport. How do they manage that expense? The state was able to come forward with money that helped Waldport with their wastewater system, helped the Port of Newport shore up their seawall on the south side of the bay, helped Lincoln City with their plans to expand a park in the south port of town, was able to help some of our coastal lakes with the expense of dealing with increased vegetation and algae blooms. Beyond that, we were able to bring in $6.5 million to begin building housing in Newport to support the Hatfield Center. So there's a place for students, for staff, for researchers, and the public to live. We brought in another $1 million to help build shelters here in Lincoln County. What's $1 million focused right here. And you put that together with the money that we brought out of the last legislative session, which again brought forth money for cultural centers, for water systems, for parks, for public buildings, and most particularly to rebuild water systems in Otis that were impacted by the wildfires, and to put Gene, I hope you're listening, $14 million to begin the work on the Big Creek dams in Newport. So huge investments, which in total between the long session and the short session, just in Lincoln County alone, translates into north of $60 million. Please don't think that's normal, and please don't think that other counties got as much as we did. We did really, really well here. The last thing I want to say, and I hope I've left a little bit of thunder for the senator, is that I think we really turned a page this legislative session. We had new leadership in the House. We had retiring leadership in the Senate. We had new leadership in both the majority positions and the minority caucuses. And as a result, I felt like we got along a lot better than we had before. I mean, the clearest example of that is 2 years ago in the short session, we reached an impasse on policy issues and one party decided to leave the building. We can talk about that a long time if you want to, but the bottom line is the session collapsed. Nothing happened. I think only 3 bills were passed. This year, we stayed there, we had our differences, and we kept talking about them, and we kept negotiating about them. And we didn't come to an agreement in each case, but we stayed in the building and worked with our differences. And I thought that was a positive thing. A great example of that is the speaker asked me to coordinate a group of 4 legislators to invest $100 million in rural infrastructure. I said, great, I'm in. What can I do? And he says, well, the catch is I'm going to appoint you and 3 Republicans. And I said, great, that's the way it should work. We should be working together, both parties, rather than one party making all of these critical decisions. And it worked very well. So those are examples of, I think, of us finding ways to work together, what I regard as the Oregon way. We don't always agree, but we continue to work together productively and civilly and to continue to negotiate until a decision has to be made. We may not all like the results, but I think the results are telling. So I'm going to pause at this point. I should have spent some time also talking about the Forest Accord, the Elliott Forest, and some of the other big projects that are moving forward. But I do want to provide at least something for Dick to talk about. Thanks for letting me go first. Usually the Senate leads off.
Well, let me jump in here. Thank you, Representative, and you do, as always, a great job. So, but I made some notes. Only a couple after you've scratched off all my talking points, but that's okay. No, in all seriousness, we both need to throw out a thank you to Jane, for organizing this and being so diligent of reminding us that this was going to take place in the links. So thanks, Jane. And also, I'm kind of looking around to see the green on St. Patty's Day. I've got my shamrock, so I'm okay. But a couple of things, and I thought the representative did a great job of big picture on the short session. I think a good reminder was, the short session is 35 days, and in spite of, the effort made by certain, members of the minority party to help with the education of these bills by reading them, all the time. So you got a thorough understanding of what was in the bills. We finished in 32 days. So, nothing wrong with that. It quite frankly gave the opportunity for many of us to socialize on the floor, where typically it doesn't happen as easily. So it was, especially for someone like myself, a new senator, I got to do a lot of chit-chatting, at the water cooler that they took out. But so, I know there's always a lot of press and noise around reading bills, but I say that simply to remind us that, it didn't seem to be an issue because we finished early. The other thing I put down, because I Representative did a great job. I also listed some things, that passed, and I think he did a good job there. I would point out that a reminder in the long session that we passed a $30+ billion budget, and that obviously wasn't enough because this session, short session, we added $2.7 billion to that budget. So it's a good reminder that we in the legislature love to spend. If it's on the table, we're going to spend it. That does raise a concern, though, for me, quite frankly, is future. And I always worry about, the next biennium, all the people, FTE that we added, programs we added, and, they were added, quite frankly, with a boost from the feds, money that came in that were supposed to be used for one time. I don't think that's the case. So I just throw out the caution flag that there may be some heartache in the next biennium as we get to the budget, either increasing taxes or cutting back programs that we may have gotten used to. The other thing I've got a list here of things that didn't pass that, I always find interesting. And, one of our favorites as a legislator is always increasing our own pay. And that was a bill that was introduced. And I think the representative did an excellent job of the process that bills go through. And I think you've perhaps even seen some of the press that some of the legislators were trying to justify why the increase. Because quite frankly, they, in their opinion, couldn't sustain the time away from a regular job. And so that was the kind of reason. That's one of the bills that did not make it through, though it was on the docket for right up to the end, where obviously, counting votes, it didn't come to the floor in either chamber. The other thing that I had made a note of, I was a little disappointed in was, so there was a bill, House Bill 4142, which was actually did not make it either. And that was a way to help protect hospital staff from, assaults that seem to be occurring more frequently than we would like. That didn't pass. And also the $1,000 tax credit for volunteer firefighters. Lincoln County and a lot of the rural coastal communities and other communities rely heavily on volunteers, especially in the fire department. These guys have to, and gals have to buy their own equipment generally. And so there was a move to try to get them, a tax credit to help offset some of that. And that failed. But I got to confess to you, my most favorite bill that did not pass was one that dusted off an existing statute, which has to do with housing, and it was called the Financial Impact Statement for Housing. And the statute currently that exists says that when legislators propose legislation or rules are made that impose, stuff on housing, that it should be accompanied with a financial impact statement. Something that, so we as legislators, as we're voting for or against, we would know what it might be doing to the cost of housing. And I'm reminded that we use the word housing in crisis and have done that for a long time. That bill did not pass at all. So it leads me to believe that we really don't think, as a general rule, that housing is a crisis, or we don't care about what the product costs. So there's got to be some refinement there. And remembering this already exists, it's just not being complied with. So that was a disappointment for me. The ag overtime representative did a great job. Interesting, there's something like 7 states currently that have an ag overtime bill legislation in place. From the farmer rancher perspective, 5 of those were as models were acceptable. It turned out that the ones in Washington and California were the 2 that weren't. And of course, that's the model we kind of took. So that's why there was a lot of angst going on with that bill. The disappointment, again, is in my opinion, the collaboration that did not occur regarding the discussion on this bill. It was heels in hard and firm right from the start. As the representative implied, there was some minor changes towards the end, but ironically, the tax credits and funding wasn't asked for by the farming community. It was just kind of thrown in there, which, they didn't ask for it. They had some other issues that they would pursue. And I've got a big category here where I think Representative Gomberg and I and the Coastal Caucus did a great job in trying to keep the coast and Lincoln County in the limelight. He and I worked real hard and accomplished the task of round childcare. And you might have heard early that there was an interpretation of rule that new childcare facilities had to have a sprinkler system. And you can imagine the cost of that, especially in a home that's being rented, for a small childcare facility. Anyway, we worked together, the Representative I and other representatives, to some mutual understanding and some workaround. So that no longer seems to be as big of a barrier as it once appeared to be. Same kind of thing was on the e-recycling. Again, you may not have been aware of it, but for your computers and electronics, there are specific drop-off sites for those. A couple in Lincoln County to make it easy for us to drop those off. Those were going to be shut down. And again, Representative I got together, with the county and got that turned around. So I think it saves us traveling miles, if at all, to recycle our electronics. And an interesting, I'm surprised the representative didn't do this, so I'm going to give him the kudos. He actually made a bill that reduced a fee. If you can believe that, the representative, put in a proposal to reduce a fee on fishing and crabbing. We combined those bills or those licenses into a combo and actually reduced the cost of that from, I think, Representative $32 down to $23. So the whole purpose of that, and it was a great idea, was to stay, certainly help our not commercial fishing, but the sports fishing. Depot Bays, Newport, where you're out day tripping, so to speak, on boat, one-day licenses or whatever. And it's to stay in competition with like the state of Washington, which is well below our $32. So we dropped it. But kudos to the representative that actually sailed through. A little clarification on the Lincoln County homeless. It's a homeless resource coordinator program. It's a pilot program. 8 areas were picked. Miraculously, 5 of those areas are in Senate District 5 on the coast. So I feel pretty good about getting 5 of the 8 pilot sites. This is actually, it is $1 million, $500,000 per year for 2 years, where, trying to coordinate existing resources around homelessness, that, rather than having separate silos and separate nonprofits working on homelessness, and they'll still work on homelessness, but bring in a coordinator of those activities. And Lincoln County, for example, the whole county is engaged as one pilot because there's a lot of coordination already. We've just, put money towards it to help see if we can fine tune it, get a better model, and share that with other areas of the state. So, that is a big deal, and I think that's the kind of thing we'd like to see happening. Try to best practices and coordination. Let's see, the funding, great job on that, and certainly with the Senate district, I go all the way down to Coos Bay. We were able to help the Port of Coos Bay with $15 million to continue with their permitting process on the dredging of that bay, and also a new training fire tower for the community college. They do a lot of work with training all the fire departments and new people to get into firefighting, and they some 750,000 for that. But and Representative Gomberg, maybe you can help me. Also the 2 million for the Oregon Ocean Science Trust, where the sea otter kind of, and there was something else I can't remember, but more studying with the whole ecosystem through that. That was a big piece as well. So I think I've got more notes, but next time, I'll jump ahead of Representative, and we could work these out. But
We've got another forum at 5:30 tonight. You can go first, Senator.
we've got it, yeah. But I do have to say that I love these forums, and I think Representative Gomberg's overall discussion, painting of the legislature is correct. I felt this was a lot more civilized than the long session. I think we're making progress as a group. I would agree with him on the leadership change certainly helped with both chambers. And so, I think we're making some progress. So it sounds good. So I'll throw it back. Jane, you can have it back.
Okay, great. I'm going to open it up for questions, but I'd like to just do a follow-up question on the childcare. So you mentioned that the requirement for sprinkler systems, it's been eliminated or reduced or what? And then can you talk a little bit more about what other supports for child care have been included in that bill?
Sure.
Sure.
Well, that we're talking two different things. So,
Okay.
we can talk about House Bill 4005, which I think was the big child care bill,
Okay.
and all the piece in there. But the sprinkler system issue was really a ruling that came out, as legislators usually cringe when we let agencies make the rules without them being vetted after. And I think this was one of those cases.
Mhm.
And so what we were able to do was go back to the agency and get a workaround regarding sprinklers, because sprinklers will still be included in new, kind of commercial facilities, those kind of things, especially being built new. But the retrofitting of homes is eliminated, provided, and provided is that your exits and entrances aren't going by or near flammable kind of stuff, because the whole idea is certainly to get young people out in case of a fire.
Mhm.
And so that we could accomplish that other ways, and it just took a while. But
if I could add something there, Dick, because I think people sit back and they say, what on earth are you talking about? Of course we want fire suppression systems where we're keeping children. But let's remember that overhead sprinklers are designed not to save lives, but to save property. And we are living in a childcare desert. The availability and the affordability of childcare is just making it impossible for some people to return to the workforce. And so we had this rule that came out that said, if you want to provide childcare in your home, you need to install overhead sprinklers. And we were able to get the rule changed so that it said that you do not need to install overhead sprinklers if, number one, the childcare is on the first or main floor. Number two, that there is no stove or fireplace between where the kids are and where the exit is, and some other kinds of I think, constructive exceptions that make it possible for us to expand the childcare availability. And not to drag us too far off topic, but I want to remind you that here we are requiring sprinkler systems in childcare facilities. We don't require sprinkler systems in any of our vacation rentals, although we do require them in any of our small hotels. I mean, those are some of the kinds of issues that we're dealing with out there as we're struggling to make sure that we've got more childcare available in our community. I was really pleased to work with the senator on this one and to push through that change. On the legislative front, if I'm not mistaken, we invested about $100 million in new childcare programs, as well as in rolling childcare into the larger workforce training package so that we could encourage more people to earn the skills they need to provide childcare. So a minimum of $100 million, $100 million right off the bat for childcare, but also another $200 million for training for childcare, healthcare, and manufacturing. And if I didn't say it clearly before, the sprinkler systems are not required if it's on the ground floor and if there is no flammable activity or stoves between where the kids are and where the exit is.
Okay, yeah, great. Thank you so much for that information. And so the 100 million for new childcare programs, what does that look like? Is that to assist individuals to start programs or childcare centers or?
Yeah, let's go, because the representative hit on, I got three kind of big components there. One of them is certainly the training and recruiting, supporting new providers, help current providers expand. So that component. Then there's another one part of that bill that provides direct payments to childcare workers to recruit and retain childcare workers. So kind of a bonus retention of existing staff. And we did that not just in childcare, but healthcare and some of the others to get some money out to try to, keep what you've got as we try to build further. And then, supports Department of Early Learning and Care and continued implication of childcare. So again, that we've got a new agency that spun out of education called Early Learning, and they're getting off the ground. And so making sure that they have everything they need to help, encourage and support this whole effort. Because, as Representative Gomberg stated, boy, with lacking childcare on the coast and in the state has held back the economy, even though the numbers would make it look like we're robust. We know differently on the coast, just simply looking at the hiring, desire to hire people. And quite frankly, a lot of the two-parent homes, families aren't able to have both working simply because they don't have childcare availability. So I think my analysis would say it's finally getting what it deserves as far as attention. I think the hard part for everybody to understand is it's going to need to be subsidized. We got to get behind that and, get it on the table as a key and important barrier that's getting in the way.
That's encouraging to hear that. We've had quite a bit of focus on childcare this year in the league, and very much aware of the issues along our part of the coast at any rate. Okay, I'd like to open it up to other people for questions. Okay, Ruth or Jack, one of the two. And you're muted.
Yeah, well, this was a short session. Was anything done to address the climate emergency? That really broke up the last session, some of the carbon tax type approaches, but I mean, this is the gorilla in the room, the fire that's about to overtake us. I didn't check. Was there any bills introduced with respect to the climate emergency in this session?
Yeah, there were. I think as Representative Gomberg stated, 200 and some bills were introduced and 126 passed. So they were in there. Again, as stated, a limited time, and it's a short session where a lot of the things that take a lot of debate and vetting, and that I would say probably the climate type of bills, eat up a lot of time and are better suited in the long session. But they were there.
Thank you.
Ruth, I'm going to jump in and I have a couple of notes in front of me on things that are climate related that came through the short session. So write down House Bill 4055, which is the forest harvest tax bill. Write down 4057, which is a water bill. 4087, which deals with wildfire zones. And then I think most significantly 1501, the private forestry accord. Let me talk about that one for just a second, because I think it's a big deal. Jack, did you ask me to slow down for a sec? Or? Oh, you're on mute.
I got the numbers down.
Okay. All right, what I wanted to say is the environmental community and the forest industries have been fighting for a generation, back and forth, and finally sat down in a room together and did what I call the Oregon Way, which is working out a series of principled compromises. Nobody got everything they wanted, but nobody got nobody lost everything either. The Forestry Accord is a set of compromises and an agreement that is intended to preserve jobs in the forest sector and to preserve our forest industry, but also to reduce spraying, maintain stream flows, and I think most significantly to address the potential for wildfires in our forest lands. So that's a big deal. And it was the first change in our Forest Practices Act in the last 50 years. That was worked out before we came to Salem, and that measure, again, that was 1501, worked its way through the entire session. You talk about the elephant in the room, and you're referring to climate. For me, the elephant in the room is Cascadia and the potential for a major earthquake in Western Oregon and the accompanying tsunamis here along the coastline. Another big deal that came through the session we did not talk about was a measure that is designed to start dealing with the fact that most of our fuel storage, oil, diesel, gas, is up on the Willamette River in Portland, in an area that is clearly subject to liquefaction when we get that big earthquake. Imagine a fuel spillage the size of Deepwater Horizon, except rather than being out in the middle of the ocean, it's in the middle of one of our rivers that flows through the industrial areas of Portland, Columbia, and out through the mouth of the Columbia to our coastline. We took some steps to begin to address that. I think the state's finally starting to get serious about earthquake awareness and earthquake response, but we've got a long, long way to go. In any event, yeah, there were climate bills, but not the big high profile cap and trade kind of things that you've seen in the past.
Linda?
Hi, I have two questions. Today in the Register Guard, there was a story about the auditor putting out a report that the mortgage interest deduction was not equitable. It might be too soon to comment on it, but at least the news report did not talk about the advantage of home ownership for people when they retire to have built up equity and have a place to live that they're not paying rent or mortgages on. Do you have any thoughts on it initially as my first question? And the second has to do with homeowner associations.
Well, Linda, I'm certainly familiar with the audit and the comments that came out of the Secretary of State's office. And what she said is that mortgage interest deductions are costing the state about $500 million in revenue every year. And most of the benefit, they say, is going to, well, they're going to people of more reliable means, which is a fancy way of saying people that are better off, because most people who have moderate or lower incomes are taking a standard deduction, particularly now that the feds have made changes there. And so fewer and fewer people are taking that mortgage interest deduction. And the point that was made in the audit, the benefits are not going to the people who we most want to help, first-time home buyers and people that can't afford to get in the door with down payments or to be able to receive mortgages. What do I think about all of that? First of all, I thought it was fascinating that the audit did not talk at all about the difference between primary homes and second homes, which I think is a significant part of this conversation. But overall, I think if we've got an issue with home ownership, we don't address it by reducing benefits to people that have invested in homes. We don't take away a benefit that they may have relied on when they decided to make that home ownership investment. What we need to do is find new ways of encouraging and assisting people to get in the door in the first place. I mean, that's my take on it. I'm not sure if the senator has something to add or a different point of view.
No, I think those are excellent points. I would just add to it a little bit. And I've not read the audit. I just saw the headlines and the noise. And one shouldn't be surprised, quite frankly, at the headlines. Quite frankly, home ownership rates rank 72% home ownership amongst white folks, while it's, I think, 40% for people of color. So, of course, if you do the math, more people, higher means or whatever, probably taking it. So the piece that I've always argued about is I'm a big fan of home ownership, and but there's a lot to home ownership. And having come from that profession, we first started working on education to get people ready, better qualified credit-wise to borrow to get into home ownership. And that was successful. Then what we discovered, as the representative has alluded to, people, first-time home buyers were extraordinarily still doing their short-form taxes, because it was easy and that's what they were used to. They weren't taking the deductions. So, and yet lenders were kind of relying on them to, whether it's energy efficient appliances, taking deductions, doing these kind of things, all went into the equation. So I guess what I'm implying is we need to look at our education system for one, and I'm still disappointed with our lack of interest in having, graduation criteria to be able to read, write, and do math as some kind of evaluation. And in that, for me, would be, a program on personal finances, kind of life skills, which would include, taxes and what makes sense and where you take these kind of, benefits where you're getting everything that's deserved. And that's why I pointed out in my opening remarks my disappointment with our lack of interest in trying to decide what goes into the price of a house. It's easy, whether it's fire sprinkler system in housings or air conditioners or, whatever. They sound good, and why shouldn't they be? But they have costs associated with it. And, we just need to be aware, not that they're right or wrong, but be aware what you're doing to the cost of the product while we're trying to get people into home ownership. And that's not just home ownership, but it's also the cost of apartments, building apartments, which translates to rent. So, we've done one heck of a job this biennium of filling subsidy buckets when it comes to housing. And they're huge, whether it's rent relief, whether it's mortgage relief, whether it's down payment assistance, all this kind of stuff. But, we've got to tackle what the end cost is as well to put a lid on it. So there's going to be a lot more regarding that whole subject, because I believe we are in a housing crisis. We just aren't acting like it. And that's my disappointment.
Let me go to my second question, which is related. And I will say the disclaimer, I'm not that yet familiar with what's going on in Oregon, but I was very horrified with my time in California to learn that common interest developments like condominiums, townhouses, planned communities, you're required to join this homeowners association or community association, whatever it's called. There's no oversight. So any conflict that can't be resolved between people defaults to the courts. Legal fees, according to a verdict search, I think is where I found it, were $50,000 to $450,000 for just one attorney. And we had a number of problems with leaks in a condo. And so I'm very concerned for reliance on volunteers that don't have expertise and encouraging people to buy a home, which I think is important, to get into these HOAs, and yet their costs are going to can go up exponentially. So I'm just curious if you've looked at this issue, what you might see as a solution. I certainly have some ideas if you go forward on that or if it comes up in the future.
Well, great question and a good observation. As a former mayor, I just love HOAs because it provides me with a nice fallback to say when someone wants to complain about the city, I can always say, oh, you live in a gated community with an HOA. That's another layer of government below the city. So deal with it there first. But you raise a good point. Again, the reason HOAs were formed, though, they're sharing expenses. It's a home, especially condos. It's a ownership type of criteria where it's one big building and you own just the inside. So somebody's got to take care of the outside. We also have zoning where you can allow commercial on the first floor and housing above, and that's all intertwined. So, but all I can do is think again is I cringed, quite frankly, when we as a society pushed attached housing and condos and stuff as first-time home buyer, kind of outlets, because you're correct. Home ownership is hard enough, let alone working with someone else to resolve issues and stuff. And when I was involved in such a thing as that, we usually had a third party, nonprofit or somebody helping oversight and guide and manage and teach the new homeowners how to work together as a home ownership association. But again, like most things, it's, I live in attached housing here, but the homeowners association only deals with the landscaping, because we all own, even though it's attached, we all own, the existing buildings. And there's not a lot of arguments around flowers and parking lot stuff. So it's homeowners associations can, be large, small, and it all depends on your legal documents of how you set it up, to help resolve issues.
Jack? Oh, sorry, Jack and then Jean.
Okay, one of the, I was in a housing development a long time ago that was, that had homeowners agreements. And the agreements looked like there was absolutely no oversight on what those agreements were. And I'm wondering if that's a problem that's going on now. Some of the articles in that agreement were very, very, they were obstructive, and it was a demand of total conformity. And is there any oversight on homeowners associations?
Jack, if I can, without specifics, I guess what I would always suggest is you need, before you buy, you need to read the documents. And clearly, a homeowners association, if that's what you're, whether it's a gated community, attached housing, anything else, those come along with it. CC&Rs, so, after the fact, it's a little tough. But to your point, in the long session, one of the things we as a legislature did was prohibited homeowners associations from not allowing gardening, for example, some vegetable gardening in communities that were under the guise of an HOA. And recently in the short session, we did the same thing with air conditioning. Some of the older buildings that may have had a provision where you couldn't do window air conditioning or something like that. So, we made those kind of changes but the caveat, as long as it didn't adversely affect the structure, because a lot of for example, a skyrise condo doesn't have open windows where you could stick a air conditioner there. So, the question, and I'll throw to the representative, let him deal with this, but it's how much government do you want? And on one hand, I hear a lot of noise about government overreach now. So, it's kind of up to you.
Well, Jack, I'm just going to say, we've got all kinds of homeowner associations. I'm thinking just here in North Lincoln County, you've got gated communities like Indian Shores and Salishan, and then you've got rural communities like where I live, Highland Estates, that has 5-acre plots, but we still have a homeowners association. The senator touched on the key point is that people need to take a look at the rules, the documents, the covenants before they buy. I don't think that happens very often. But the second thing is, I would say to you with the greatest of respect that one person's obstruction is the other person's protection of a neighborhood. And you get into these issues about whether or not you can cut down trees or store RVs or old cars that are no longer in use. Can you have park RVs on your property and turn them into mini RV lots when the area is, according to the covenants, intended for single owner occupancy? To my best knowledge, there is not oversight on HOAs, and I think that was your question. I think the looming problem is that a lot of these covenants were written years ago and are hard to change. And they're hard to change if costs have gone up when for maintenance, whether it's for your road or for your roof, and the covenants don't allow the homeowners to collect enough money to address those needs. They also haven't gone up as societal norms change. More people working from home, and we've got home offices when home-based businesses, quote unquote, are prohibited in the rules. And then finally, I see a lot of these covenants that are written in ways that there really is not a process for enforcement or for appeal. And I think that's a problem area. Again, a lot of these things written with the best of intentions 40, 50 years ago and just don't reflect the way life is out here on the coast right now. I'm not aware of oversight, but I'm also aware of looming problems as people try to figure out how to maintain their neighborhoods in the face of change.
Okay, I'd like, Jean has a question. I'd like to make this the last question because I want to be respectful of the senator and representative's time. And so Jean, if you'll go ahead.
There are actually two questions, but there are a couple of things that came up in the conversation that I'd be interested in briefly both of your thoughts on. First of all, thank you for what you did do, and I'm very grateful to see some more funding going into working on Big Creek Dam because I'm underneath it, and so I'm very concerned about that. But the two issues that are long-standing ones that were mentioned in your comments are pay increases for legislators and the kicker. The suggestion was made that the pay increases come up because people can't continue working. And I'd like to point out, as a former legislator, and the two of you sitting there, we're all in a position where we're retired and in some manner have other sources of income. The challenge that came out in this session was that we're not getting representation from a younger, still working, or perhaps not economically stable representation in our legislature. And that's the reason for this continuing comment. So I am kind of interested in your thoughts on a pay increase. And secondly, on the kicker. My short and grossly oversimplified explanation was always that you put together your household budget, then your employer says, guess what, you're getting a raise. And you can either spend that on things that your budget wasn't able to contend with, or you could put it into savings, or you could say to your employer, thank you very much, but I don't really need it, so you can have it back. And that's exactly what the state of Oregon does. I've obviously shared my opinion, but we have such chronic underfunding in so many places. I'd really like to have both of you just touch on your thoughts personally on the kicker and the pay increase for legislators.
Well, let's take them one at a time. And I'll start with the legislative pay, which was a difficult issue to get taken care of in 5 weeks. And let's be candid and say a hard issue to deal with in an election year. I'm not sure the legislature should be making decisions about legislative pay. I'd rather see some independent body making a recommendation, and they darn well ought to recommend a lot more money, because I doing my full-time legislative job, and it's no longer a part-time citizen legislature, it's a full-time citizen legislature, and I'm getting paid about a third what county commissioners get. Not that I resent what they're earning, but I think I just offer that for comparison. Now, you raised the point that it's harder for people to come into the Capitol when they're younger, when they have professions, when they have families, when they have other challenges. And we sure need a diverse legislature. A diverse legislature that better reflects Oregonians is going to be better able to reflect the needs of Oregonians in the decisions that we make. And while I think we need some older folks that are retired and have spent a lifetime working or running a business or growing a family, I think we also need young folks that are trying to pay off their student debt, raise a family, and start a job or a business. I would make the observation that if you look at the legislature, we are more diverse, both in terms of age and background and ethnicity or color, than we ever have been before. The challenge is that a lot of people are coming in and they can't afford to stay. Now, there's an interesting policy conversation. Do we want people to stay in the legislature a long time? And how long is an appropriate amount of time for them to serve? Or should they come in for a few years, make their contributions, and get out? I'm reminded of the former legislator in the part of Oregon where I live, Paul Hanneman, who served for nearly 40 years. And the good part about that is that the legislators are the ones that have the institutional knowledge, the background, the experience, the understanding of the process, rather than the agencies and the lobbyists and the staff. I think it's members where you want that expertise. I'm rambling at you a little bit because I think this is a fairly complex subject. I mean, the other part of this is that right now, I read a story that in the House where I serve with 60 members, 26 of them are leaving before we reconvene next January. That's alarming turnover. That's a huge loss of expertise, ability, and talent. And having been there, that a little bit of seniority goes a long, long way in terms of understanding what's going on, how to make something happen, or how to avoid mistakes that you've made in the past. So it's a complex issue. I'd like to see the salaries go up. I'd like to see somebody else make that recommendation. I'm going to pause before I get into the kicker, because I think the senator may have some observations on this as well.
I do. And I was engaged early with this discussion. And so I was kind of, I agree with a lot of the statements the representative made. But one of the things that I found was actually a statement from Teddy Roosevelt, who actually a picture of him hangs in my Senate office. So, I always love to, quote Teddy if I can, or, Abraham Lincoln. But, this must have been, whenever Teddy was president, he was confronted with this question as well. And he made a statement: it would be a dreadful misfortune for a person to grow to feel that their whole livelihood and whole happiness depends upon their staying in office. Such a feeling prevents them from being a real service to the people while in office and always puts them under the heaviest strain to barter their convictions for the sake of holding office. So it's not a new subject by any means, but certainly I would agree it's a tough topic for an elected to deal with, especially in an election year. And it always seems like there's an election year. So, you know, move. I don't have anything else other than, you know, go ahead, go with the kicker, Representative.
Well, thanks so much.
We spend too much as it is. You know, geez.
Gene, you've heard me say this before. I think that the kicker is alarmingly popular and it's lousy public policy. In my business, when we had a good year, we didn't call up all our customers and say, we want to give you some money back. We invested it in the needs of our business or in the people that work for us. And we could invest that kicker in tax reductions if we wanted to. But I think just simply mailing it back to people, because the fact of the matter is that while an Oregonian of modest income will probably get about $300 or $400 off their taxes this year, and a median income Oregonian will probably get about $700 or $800 back this year, that more affluent Oregonians are going to get back thousands and thousands of dollars. And we're going to have a record kicker this year and next year. I would like to see us put a cap on the kicker. And what I mean by that is if we said, we're going to give you your kicker, but we're going to limit it to, say, $1,000. 80% of Oregonians would get every single penny in the kicker that they're currently getting. But people of higher incomes would not get these $10,000 checks back. And I say that euphemistically because it's actually a credit on your taxes, not a check in the mail. But be that as it may, I would like to see the kicker capped. Most people would get what they're already getting, but the larger returns would be eliminated, and we would have that money available to us to either reduce taxes or to invest in some of the pressing needs that our state is facing. That may well be an unpopular perspective, but I think it's a practical one that works for most people that are listening or may listen to this presentation later.
Let me also add to that. I think this is, again, an area where we're conflicted. We send multiple messages. And again, I go back to our long session, 21 in last year, where we as a body chose not to give back the haircut that the state of Oregon took from the federal stimulus checks that went out. So as you know, certainly the state doesn't tax the federal money, but for some reason, they were able to take a haircut from your stimulus checks that amounted to a mere $300 million were scraped off. Now, as a body, we chose not to send that back to the citizens of Oregon, even though the feds and congressmen and women indicated that that wasn't intended to be taxed by the state. But yet in the short session, we turn right around and are sending $600 to a lot of these same folks, for a mere $180 million. So, I'm confused, and I love doing those floor speeches where I'm confused by this body, where on one hand and it depends on whose name is on the bill, is often and too often the case. So, I think, and I agree with Representative Gomberg, we got a lot of work to do, and I would hope that the tone and temperature inside these chambers is cooling down so that we can work through some of these things and have a bit of consistency in our message to the Oregonians.
So,
wrap up on the kicker is that here in Oregon, we're required to have a balanced budget. So what that means is that we can only spend what we bring in. So when we have sorry. So when we have a bad year, we cut budgets. And that means reducing our support for education, healthcare, transportation, and public safety. When we have a good year, we give the money back. I think it would make better sense to cap the kicker and put the extra money into reserves so that when we have a bad year, we've got the resources to balance things out rather than have a roller coaster of a cycle of good years, bad years, good years, bad years. To Dick's closing comments, I will quote his friend Abraham Lincoln, who says that we are not enemies, we're friends. We cannot be enemies, even though passions inflame our response to these issues from time to time, that if we listen to our better angels, that we'll end up in a better place. And I think that is the Oregon way.
Okay, seems like a perfect ending statement there. I want to thank both of you so much for the time that you've spent with us today. I know you have a town hall this evening. Do you want to plug that a little bit for people that may still have questions or want to learn more?
Well, I think, I don't have the data in front of me. I think 5:30 to 6:30, the community college. The representative will be actually in person without masks, inside a building at the Lincoln City campus. But it's wide open. I don't know, Representative, do you have the link or whatever, how people can connect to it?
I'm watching for Luke to pop that into the.
I'm looking for it
chat.
right now. I'm dropping in the chat for everybody. Just one sec.
Thank you, Luke.
Okay, well, while he's doing that, let me just say thank you again. This has been very informative. I wish I could be there tonight, but I'm going to be heading off on a mission trip to Mexico tomorrow, and we're loading vehicles tonight, so I will be in Salem. But really appreciate the time that you spent with us. The information, very helpful. And on behalf of all of the league, I just thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.